Hello everyone, I am the storyteller and I am here to help you today. I know you use this video to fall asleep, so before that, like the video and subscribe to the channel. Also, where are you from and what time are you watching? Now get comfortable and relax. I never expected to face something so strange in such a quiet place. I moved in because the street felt calm and almost empty. No cars passed after 9 at night. Neighbors kept to themselves. I liked that. It was my first big decision after changing jobs. I wanted a peaceful routine with less noise and fewer distractions. I thought this house would give me that. The real estate listing described the property as spacious, with 2 floors and a small backyard. It mentioned an upstairs bathroom with a vintage-style tub. I didn't care too much about the tub's design, but the rest of the house looked good in the photos. When I visited, everything was in order. The walls were clean. The rooms felt large. The living room had enough space for a couch and a TV stand. The kitchen had decent appliances. The upstairs bedroom had a view of the backyard and a nearby row of tall pine trees. The landlord told me the place had been rented out a few times before, but the tenants never stayed long. He attributed that to their job changes or personal reasons. It didn't bother me. I signed the contract and moved in 2 weeks later. During the first few nights, I slept well. The house was so quiet it almost felt like wearing noise-canceling headphones. Around me, there was barely any traffic. Sometimes I heard a dog barking far off, but that was it. Even the refrigerator's motor sounded loud in comparison to the neighborhood's silence. I spent my free time watching movies, cooking simple meals, and occasionally talking to a friend on the phone. Everything seemed fine. But on the 5th night, something weird happened. It was around 2 in the morning. I woke up because of running water above me. My bedroom was right under the upstairs bathroom. At first, I thought I had left the faucet dripping before bed. I got up, turned on the light in the hallway, and walked up the stairs. My legs felt shaky because I was half asleep. When I reached the bathroom, I saw the tub's faucet running at full blast. Water splashed against the porcelain surface and was about an inch away from overflowing. I quickly shut it off. My heart pounded. I stood there in my shorts and t-shirt, staring at the swirling water. I checked the handle. It was turned all the way to the right, as if someone had cranked it open. That made no sense to me. I knew I hadn't used the tub at all that day. I drained some of the water, then I dried my hands and shook off the uneasy feeling. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe the faucet was loose or there was some pressure issue. I wiped the floor and went back to bed. In the morning, I inspected the faucet, turning it on and off. It seemed normal. I looked under the sink for any leaks or odd connections. Everything appeared fine. I shrugged it off and went to work, but it stayed on my mind. 2 nights later, the same thing occurred at nearly 3 in the morning. I woke up to rushing water again. This time, it sounded even louder, as if the tub was about to overflow. My chest tightened. I hurried up the stairs, flicked on the bathroom light, and saw water just a 1/4 inch from the edge. Again, the faucet was fully open. I twisted it off and stood there, breathing heavily. My bare feet got wet from the small puddle on the tiles. I muttered a few curses under my breath and tried to steady my heartbeat. After cleaning up the water, I went back to bed, though my mind spun with questions. How was this happening? The next day, I decided to call a plumber. I had to pay out of my own pocket, but it felt worth it for peace of mind. The plumber arrived in the afternoon. He checked the pipes, the seals, the water pressure, and the faucet assembly. He even went under the house to inspect the main line. An hour later, he came back inside and shrugged. He said everything looked normal. No leaks, no faulty parts, and no reason for the faucet to turn on by itself. He suggested maybe the handle was loose, but he tested it. Nothing was loose. He left me a bill and went on his way. That night, I made sure to close the bathroom door. I placed a folded towel under the faucet handle, hoping it would keep the handle from turning if there was some strange pressure surge. But at around 2:30 in the morning, I was jolted awake by the same gushing noise. My entire body tensed. My ears rang with the sound of water echoing in the stillness. I forced myself out of bed, heart pounding. I felt a knot in my stomach. When I opened the bathroom door, the towel I had placed was on the floor, completely soaked. The faucet was fully open again. The tub was about to spill over. I shut off the water with a trembling hand. A few drips fell onto the tile, making me flinch. My chest was tight, and my breathing was shallow. I stared at the tub, half expecting something or someone to appear behind me in the mirror. But I was alone. I couldn't sleep after that. I stayed in the living room, the TV playing some infomercial, volume low. My thoughts kept circling around what I had seen. I tried to think logically, but nothing explained why the faucet kept turning on in the middle of the night. Around 5 in the morning, I dozed off on the couch. I woke up 2 hours later, exhausted. I called the landlord that afternoon, wanting an explanation. He sounded hesitant. He admitted that previous tenants had mentioned the same issue. He said it had been happening for years, but no plumber had ever found a problem. Then he added something that made my skin crawl. The original owner of the house, the person who built it, had apparently died in that upstairs bathroom, supposedly drowning in that tub. The landlord mumbled that detail, like he didn't want to say it out loud. He claimed he never told me because he didn't think it was relevant and because it wasn't something that legally had to be disclosed. I felt my face get hot. My palms started sweating. I cursed under my breath, feeling both frustrated and a bit creeped out. After that call, my perspective on the house changed. I went from feeling safe to feeling on edge. I started noticing small things, like cold spots in the hallway or faint dripping sounds when there shouldn't be any water running. My nerves got worse every evening. I would lie in bed, anticipating that moment when the water started blasting upstairs. Some nights it didn't happen, which left me even more jittery. I'd doze off around midnight, wake up every hour listening. Other nights it happened right on schedule, between 2 and 3 in the morning. Each time I jumped out of bed, ran up the stairs and shut off the faucet, my heart pounding so hard it hurt. My muscles felt tense. My chest felt tight. Every time I walked into that bathroom, a chill spread across my shoulders. I tried ignoring it, thinking it would stop eventually, but it didn't. I set up my phone to record video in the bathroom one night. I placed it on a chair, pointing at the tub and faucet. I hit record and went to bed around midnight. At exactly 2:30, the sound of water woke me up. I rushed in, turned off the faucet, then stopped the recording. The next morning I played the video. I saw nothing until the exact moment the faucet blasted open. It went from dry to gushing in a split second. The handle appeared to move on its own, rotating as if an invisible hand was pushing it. There was no movement in the rest of the bathroom. I couldn't see any shadow or figure, just that handle turning. Watching it gave me goosebumps. I started avoiding the bathtub during the day. I used the downstairs shower instead. Sometimes I would open the bathroom door upstairs just a crack to peek inside, my heart hammering, expecting to see water running. When it was off, I felt a small wave of relief, but it never lasted long. My nights turned into a pattern of broken sleep and anxiety. My hands would shake when I climbed the stairs in the dark. I double-checked the faucet every night before bed, turning it so tight that my wrist hurt. It didn't matter. It always turned on at that late hour. The same sudden roar of water hitting porcelain. After a few weeks, I felt exhausted. My job performance was slipping because I couldn't concentrate. I found myself making mistakes, forgetting details in meetings, and yawning through the day. My boss asked if everything was okay at home. I lied and said I was just stressed about personal stuff. I didn't want to mention a rogue bathtub that seemed to have a mind of its own. That sounded ridiculous, but it was my reality every single night. One weekend, I took it upon myself to check every pipe in the house. I crawled under the sinks, behind the toilets, and even up into the attic to see if there was some hidden water line. I wore gloves and used a flashlight, shining it into dark corners. Dust coated my arms and face. My back ached from bending and squatting. But I found nothing unusual. The upstairs plumbing was straightforward. The tub's pipes connected to the main water line behind the wall, and they were in good condition. There were no leaks or faulty valves. Everything was normal, except for the fact that the faucet turned itself on at night. My landlord suggested maybe I could keep paying rent, but move out early if I really couldn't handle it. He offered to let me break the lease without a penalty if I found someone else to take over. Part of me wanted to leave immediately, but I had just moved in. The thought of packing up again annoyed me. I was also curious. How could this be happening? And more importantly, how could I stop it? I tried turning off the main water valve before bed one night. That was a bit inconvenient because it meant I had no running water if I needed the bathroom at night, but I was desperate to see if it changed anything. So I shut off the water supply around 11 at night. I went to bed. Sure enough, around 2:30 in the morning, I still woke up. This time I heard a faint banging sound, like pipes rattling under pressure. My pulse quickened. When I went upstairs, the faucet was off. No water came out, but the handle was turned all the way open and the pipe was making a low vibration. I could hear a soft humming noise. It reminded me of water trying to force its way through. I stood there with a racing heartbeat, looking at that handle. I reached out and turned it back to the closed position. The humming stopped. My arm hair stood on end. That was the moment I realized I couldn't fix this. The plumber couldn't fix it. The landlord knew about it for years. The house itself had this bizarre trait. Whether I called it paranormal or some unknown plumbing quirk, I didn't care anymore. I wanted out. Over the next week, I spoke to a coworker who was looking for a place to rent. I was honest, but not overly detailed. I said I had found the neighborhood too quiet and preferred a different location. He liked the area and was happy to take over the lease. Once we signed all the paperwork, I started packing. On my last night in that house, the faucet turned on again at 2 in the morning. I heard the rush of water, walked upstairs, and turned it off for the final time. My hands trembled, but a wave of relief washed over me. I knew I wouldn't deal with it anymore. I left the next day. I never found out if the new tenant encountered the same nightly disturbance, but I had a feeling he would. Maybe he would call me, or maybe he wouldn't. I was just glad to be gone. That's my story. No matter how quiet and welcoming a place might seem, sometimes there's something beneath the surface that defies normal explanation. I didn't solve the mystery. I didn't make it disappear. But I got away from it, and I haven't looked back. I still live in the same city, just a different neighborhood, and I have no desire to visit that old house or its upstairs bathroom ever again. I couldn't shake off the tension from the moment I got that phone call. My brother's voice was louder than usual, and he spoke fast. He said he saw me standing in my front yard, wearing my old red shirt, watering the plants like nothing was out of the ordinary. That didn't make sense because I was in another city that entire weekend on a work trip. The idea of someone who looked just like me roaming around my property made my stomach tighten. I came back home and tried to figure out if this was some weird prank or if I was losing my mind. I left for my trip on a Friday morning. I drove 3 hours to a small town where my company held a seminar. My schedule was tight, filled with presentations, meetings, and a group dinner. I stayed at a modest hotel near the venue. Everything went as expected until Saturday afternoon when my phone rang. It was my brother Dave. He sounded surprised and a bit confused. He asked, "Why didn't you say you were back? I just saw you outside your house." I told him he had to be mistaken because I was still out of town. He paused for a moment, said he was absolutely sure he saw me in my yard, then repeated that he even honked his horn. He claimed this other me waved at him with a casual motion, as if nothing strange was going on. He asked if I was messing with him, or if I had come home early. I said no. I heard him take a breath and he said, "Well, that's weird," then hung up. The rest of my trip was a blur. I went through the motions, finished the seminar, exchanged business cards, and tried to keep my head in the game. But I felt an uneasy chill whenever I remembered Dave's tone of voice. He's not the type to imagine things. He's solid, grounded, and likes to joke around, but not about stuff like this. On Sunday, I packed my bags early and headed home. I couldn't focus on anything else. I kept replaying that phone call in my head. When I got back that evening, everything looked normal at first. The front door was locked. The windows were shut. The yard looked the same as when I left. The flower bed was a little dry because I didn't water it, so that made me wonder what Dave actually saw. It definitely didn't look like anyone had been tending the garden. Nothing looked tampered with inside. The house was quiet. My living room was just how I left it. I went to the kitchen and checked the back door, finding it locked. My spare key was in its usual spot, hidden behind a loose brick by the door, but it hadn't moved. No footprints around that area, just some dried leaves. The next morning, I decided to ask around. My next-door neighbor, Sandra, was home. I walked over, knocked on her door, and waited. She opened it with a friendly smile, then immediately asked if I was okay. I said yes, why wouldn't I be? She said she noticed me, well, someone she thought was me, outside in my yard on Saturday morning. She assumed I had come home early, but found it odd that I didn't say hello or mention my trip. She said she called my name over the fence, but the figure just gave her a small nod and continued watering the plants. She noticed I looked a bit pale, or at least that's what she said. I felt a jolt in my stomach. When I asked if she was sure it was me, she said, "Well, I guess it wasn't, but it sure looked like you from where I was standing." My chest felt tight. I tried to keep calm, but I felt sweat prickling at my forehead. I explained to Sandra that I was out of town all weekend. She looked confused. She insisted the person looked like me, but the skin seemed off somehow. I didn't know what to say. I thanked her for letting me know and walked back to my place. My heart was pounding. This was the second person to confirm they saw my double. I had no idea what was happening. I started checking every inch of my yard. I looked at the grass for any footprints or disturbed patches of soil. I saw a few faint outlines, like someone had stood in one spot near the garden hose, but it might have been older. I had no way of telling for sure. The garden hose was coiled up as I'd left it. The spigot was turned off. The ground around the flower bed was dry. Nothing indicated someone actually watered those plants. My red shirt was inside the house in the laundry hamper. I went to check. Sure enough, it was still there, waiting to be washed. I felt a wave of nausea. If my red shirt was in the hamper, then whoever was outside was wearing something identical. My mind started racing with possibilities. Maybe it was a stranger, but how did they look just like me? Maybe it was a trick of the light, but Dave and Sandra both saw this person close up. I called Dave and asked him for more details. He described the scene with clarity. He was driving by, saw me, slowed down, and honked. The person turned, waved with the left hand, and continued tending the garden. Dave said the person looked normal except the face was a little blank, like there wasn't much expression. Dave assumed I was busy or something. He drove off without a second thought until we spoke on the phone. After hearing that, I felt a heaviness in my chest. I tried to stay calm, but that night, I couldn't sleep well. I kept hearing random sounds like creaks and groans from the floorboards. I stayed in bed staring at the ceiling. My stomach felt tight. Every time I closed my eyes, I pictured someone with my face standing in my yard, wearing that red shirt, staring back at me. I wanted answers. On Tuesday, I took the day off work to investigate further. I live in a small neighborhood, so I walked around to see if anyone else might have noticed something. Most people were at their jobs, but I spoke to an older man who was watering his own lawn on the next block. I asked if he saw anyone around my house on Saturday. He said no, he hadn't paid attention. He did mention that sometimes random solicitors come by, but they usually carry flyers or ring doorbells. I was getting nowhere with that. I called my homeowner's insurance hotline to see if they had any advice. They suggested I check if there were any signs of forced entry, or if anything was stolen. But there was nothing missing. Everything was in place. They recommended installing a security camera, or at least a doorbell camera. I decided that was a good idea, so I drove out to the local electronics store and got a simple camera system. It wasn't very expensive, just a small motion-activated camera I could set up near the front door. I spent the afternoon installing it, following the instructions step by step. By the time I finished, I felt a bit better. like I was doing something productive. The next day, I went back to work. My coworkers asked how my trip went, and I gave them a basic summary. I left out the weird story because I didn't want people to think I was paranoid. I tried to focus on my tasks. I worked through spreadsheets, answered emails, and met with my boss about a client. But I couldn't get my mind off the situation at home. Every time my phone buzzed, my stomach jumped. I kept expecting Dave or Sandra to call me and say they saw me out there again. When I got home that evening, I checked the camera footage. Nothing interesting showed up. Just me leaving in the morning, me coming back in the afternoon, and the mail carrier dropping off a package. I felt a strange sense of relief, but also a lingering tension. I realized I was hoping to see something, to prove I wasn't imagining this entire scenario. At the same time, I was scared of seeing some stranger with my face walking around my yard. I decided to keep the camera rolling every day. Over the next few days, I talked to Dave again. He said he hadn't seen anything else. I asked him if he might have dozed off while driving or maybe saw someone who just resembled me. He got defensive and insisted he knew what he saw. We got into a small argument. He told me he wouldn't bring it up anymore if I was going to accuse him of lying. I apologized. I told him I just wanted to make sense of it all. Saturday morning came around, exactly 1 week after the incident. I got up early, brewed coffee, and sat on my porch. The sky was clear, the air was a bit crisp. I was on edge, staring at every person who walked by. I felt my pulse beat in my neck. I was expecting a repeat scenario, but nothing happened. No one came near my yard, and I didn't see any suspicious cars. By noon, I relaxed a little. I went inside, heated a frozen pizza, and watched some TV to distract myself. My phone was silent for most of the day. That afternoon, I went outside to do actual yard work. I wore an old gray t-shirt, not the red one, which was still in the laundry hamper. I turned on the hose and watered the flowers. As I did, I looked around to see if anyone was watching. Everything seemed normal. Sandra was out getting groceries, judging by the empty driveway. Dave's car wasn't parked anywhere nearby. I was alone. Nothing felt out of place, aside from my own nerves. I finished the watering, turned off the spigot, and coiled up the hose. Then I went back inside. I checked the camera footage on my phone. It showed me in my gray shirt, watering the garden. That looked normal, no double. Still, my heart was racing while I watched it. I wondered if the camera would catch any glitch, but it didn't. I stayed in for the rest of the day, just doing laundry and cooking dinner. I went to sleep that night feeling a bit uneasy. Every little sound outside made me flinch. Sunday morning, I decided to knock on Sandra's door again and ask if she remembered any small detail about the person in the yard. She said she didn't see the person's face clearly, just noticed they had the same build as me and wore a red shirt. She was sure the hair color was mine, though. She recalled that the person held the hose in a stiff way, almost mechanical, but she only glanced for a few seconds before going inside. She assumed it was me. She apologized for not looking closer. I told her not to feel bad. Over the following week, nothing else happened. No sightings, no phone calls from Dave about seeing me in places I wasn't. The camera footage only showed my normal comings and goings, plus the mail carrier and a couple of neighbors passing by. Still, I couldn't relax. I felt a weird sensation whenever I stepped outside. I kept looking over my shoulder, expecting to see someone who looked exactly like me. I checked my locks every night, tested the windows, and looked for any sign that someone had been messing around. Everything seemed locked up and solid. The red shirt was still in my hamper. I finally decided to wash it just to break the strange hold it had on my thoughts. When I tossed it in the washing machine, I felt my hands shaking. I pressed the start button, and the hum of the machine filled the laundry room. I stood there for a moment, watching the water fill the basin. I took a deep breath to calm my nerves. I never discovered who that person was, or why they looked like me. My brother still brings it up sometimes, usually when we're hanging out. He jokes about my evil twin or calls it some weird trick of the universe. Sandra avoids the topic. She seems uncomfortable whenever it comes up. And me, I just live with the unsettling memory. I can't explain it. I don't have any evidence except for the testimonies of two people I trust. It never happened again, as far as I know, but I check my camera footage every week just to be sure. I keep expecting to see that stiff figure in a red shirt waving at me from my own front yard. It hasn't happened yet, but the thought still makes my heart pound. I don't like to talk about it much, but it's always there in the back of my mind. I tell this story because it's one of the strangest things I've ever experienced. I wasn't looking for anything bizarre. I was just going through my normal life, traveling for work, and minding my business. Then I came home to find that someone had shown up in my place, wearing clothes like mine, waving at my own brother. It left a mark on me. It made me more cautious. I check the doors and windows a bit more obsessively now. I glance at strangers' faces longer than I should. Sometimes I even check my reflection in the mirror and wonder if I'll ever see something I can't explain. So far, it's just me staring back. The same face I've always known. But I still remember that phone call, the confusion in my brother's voice and the neighbor's claims. That's something I can't just forget. I moved into the new condo a week ago. On my first night, I heard a low hum coming from the central air conditioning system. I thought it was normal. New buildings sometimes have quirks. By the second night, the noise got under my skin. I sat up in bed, listening to a muffled, repetitive drone that seemed to rise and fall at random intervals. It wasn't just airflow. It sounded more like distant voices, but I couldn't make out any words. My heart pounded. I felt a knot in my gut. I told myself it was just the AC. Still, I stayed awake until dawn, staring at the ceiling. By the third night, I was tired from unpacking and from work. I dozed off around 10. An hour later, I snapped awake because I heard my name. It was faint, buried in the hum of the vents. I froze, holding my breath, hoping I had imagined it. Then I heard something again. My name, repeated by a raspy whisper, drifting in from somewhere inside the walls. My heart hammered. I got out of bed. My legs felt shaky, but I forced myself to check around. Every light was off except the small lamp near the couch. The noise followed me from the bedroom to the living room, always out of reach. I felt like I was chasing a shadow. I decided to shut off the air conditioner to make sure I wasn't mixing up normal mechanical sounds with something else. I walked over to the thermostat. My hand was trembling. I pressed the button to turn the system off. The fan stopped. The condo fell silent except for my own breathing. I felt a small rush of relief. Then I heard it again, a soft scraping through the ductwork. It moved overhead like something crawling through the vents. My scalp tingled. My arms broke out in goosebumps. I stood frozen, not sure where to go. I forced myself to stay calm. I told myself it could be a loose part in the ventilation, or maybe the duct was expanding and contracting with the change in temperature. But it didn't sound like metal. It felt closer, like a whisper running across the walls. I moved slowly toward the living room. The largest vent was near the ceiling, behind a decorative grill. The lights were on low, casting shadows across the space. When I got close, I heard my name again. The voice was rough, like someone who had smoked for 20 years. I swallowed hard. My mouth went dry. I called out, asking if anyone was there. Nothing answered, but I felt my skin crawling. The fine hair on the back of my neck stood up. I turned on all the lights. It was 2 a.m, and I was wide awake, searching for an explanation. I checked every room. I looked inside closets, even though I knew nobody was there. I still felt that presence. It made my stomach churn. Eventually, I grabbed my phone and called the building's after-hours emergency line. I told them I was hearing strange sounds coming from the vents. The guy on the phone sounded half asleep. He said someone could come out in the morning to check it. That was it. I spent the rest of the night on the couch with all the lights on. I kept staring at that grill on the living room wall. Sometimes I heard faint clicking noises, but they faded after a while. At dawn, I finally fell asleep. I woke up around 9 to a phone call from the maintenance team. They scheduled a visit for the afternoon. I felt a bit better knowing professionals would look at it. I told myself they would find some simple reason behind all this. Maybe there was a leak or a small piece of debris caught in the ducts. They arrived around 2. 2 guys in uniforms carried a ladder and some tools. I walked them through the condo, explaining what happened. They seemed polite but skeptical. One of them climbed the ladder and removed the grill in the living room. He pointed a flashlight into the duct, checking for blockages. They both spent about an hour going through the system. I hovered near them, feeling uneasy but trying not to show it. They tested the thermostat, checked the filters, listened for unusual sounds. After a while, one of them shrugged and said everything seemed fine. The other guy nodded. They told me there were no leaks, no loose components, no obvious issues. They suggested I might be hearing typical expansion noises or air pressure changes. They offered to schedule a more thorough inspection if it continued, but for now they had nothing else to report. I felt a mix of relief and frustration. On one hand, there wasn't a serious mechanical problem. On the other hand, they basically told me it was all normal. I knew what I heard. It was my name, spoken in a voice that didn't sound mechanical at all. But I thanked them, and they left. I tried to go about my day. I still had boxes to unpack and furniture to organize. Around 5 in the afternoon, I heard that low hum again. This time it was quieter, like a slow vibration in the background. I tried to ignore it. I made dinner, turned on the TV, and tried to relax. By 9, I was exhausted. I turned off the lights and went to bed. My sleep didn't last long. Around midnight, I woke up sweating. The AC was on, circulating cool air, but I felt hot. I heard a faint buzz in the background, then something like a whisper. I got out of bed and stood there listening hard. I felt the blood pumping in my ears. The whisper said my name again. Alex. Alex. I jerked around, looking for any source of the sound. It felt like it was coming from the corner of the room where the vent connected to the ceiling. My throat felt tight. My heart was racing. I turned on the lamp beside the bed. I decided to shut off the system again, just to confirm. This time I dashed out to the thermostat, hit the off switch and waited. The fan stopped. The rush of air died down. My breathing sounded too loud in my own ears. Then I heard a faint scraping sound move from the bedroom vent to the hallway vent. I ran to the hall, flipping lights as I went. I stood under the vent, holding my breath. It was quiet. I walked back to the living room. The large vent was open again, the same one the maintenance guys had messed with. The metal grill was still there, but the center part had a small gap, probably from when they removed it earlier. I swear I saw a slight movement behind it, like a flicker of shadow. I felt my chest tighten. I couldn't think of anything to do except stare. I was sweating hard, and my hands felt clammy. Then the whisper came again, close to the vent. Alex. I jumped back, nearly slipping on the hardwood floor. I grabbed my cell phone. I didn't know if I should call security or the police, but what would I say? That my air vents were calling my name? I needed to confirm I wasn't losing my mind. I went outside, down the corridor, and I checked the other units. Most people had their doors closed and it was late. I listened for any strange sounds in the hallway. Everything was quiet. I returned to my condo, heart pounding. I locked the door behind me. I stood there staring at the vent. I wanted to be somewhere else, but I also wanted to prove to myself that this was real. I pulled a chair over to the wall and climbed up to inspect the vent closely. I placed my ear near the gap. My muscles felt tight, and my mouth was parched. For a moment, I heard nothing. Then I felt a slight rush of air against my ear. The whisper said my name again, soft but distinct. Alex. My stomach flipped. I almost dropped my phone. I jumped off the chair and ran to the couch. I sat there breathing fast, wiping sweat from my forehead. I wondered if this was some elaborate prank. Maybe someone had installed a weird speaker system. The thought didn't make me feel better. It just made me angry. I decided to contact the condo management first thing in the morning. That night, I barely slept. The next day, I visited the management office as soon as they opened. I described everything I had experienced. The woman at the desk raised her eyebrows. She pulled up my file and saw the maintenance request from the day before. She asked if they had found anything. I told her they hadn't, but the situation was getting worse. She said she would schedule a more comprehensive inspection, including a look at the building's main AC system. She apologized for the inconvenience. I appreciated that, but it didn't calm my nerves. I left, feeling on edge. The second inspection happened that afternoon. A different crew came, more specialized. They had better equipment. They checked the ductwork in my unit and also in the utility rooms on my floor. They spent a good 2 hours here, scanning for any signs of leaks or hidden issues. When they finished, the main guy told me everything seemed intact. He said the only noise they picked up was normal air circulation. I insisted they hadn't been here at night, so maybe they wouldn't hear what I hear in the early hours. They looked at each other. I could tell they didn't believe me. They packed up and left. I felt more isolated after that. I knew I wasn't imagining things. My body's reactions were real. The sweat, the tension, the jolts of fear. I called a friend who lived across town and told him about it. He sounded concerned, but he also suggested I might be experiencing stress or sleep issues. I had started a new job recently. Moving into a new place is always tough. He suggested I see a doctor. I told him I'd think about it. But deep down I knew this wasn't stress. There was something in the building, in the ducts, calling my name. Over the next few nights, the pattern continued. Usually around midnight or 1 in the morning, I'd hear the hum rising. Then I'd hear the whispering. Sometimes it said my name once or twice. Other times I heard soft breathing like someone gasping for air. My chest would tighten and I'd feel trapped. I started sleeping with the TV on, hoping the background noise would cover it. It didn't. I tried earplugs. That only made me more conscious of the vibrations traveling through the floors. One evening I tried a different approach. I waited until I first heard the whisper. Then I grabbed a broom handle and banged on the vent, hoping to scare off whatever might be there. I shouted, telling it to stop. My voice echoed in the empty living room. My fists felt sore from gripping the broom so hard. I kept shouting for a few minutes, then silence. I waited, heart pounding. Suddenly there was a scratching noise from the vent in the hallway. I charged out there, brandishing the broom like a weapon. I slammed it against the grill. More scratching, moving fast toward the bedroom vent. It was like it was taunting me. My adrenaline spiked. I followed the noise to the bedroom. I stood under the vent with the broom, shouting again, but I didn't hear anything else. My hand was shaking so badly I almost dropped the broom. I stayed in the living room the rest of the night with every light on. I felt like a fool, but I also didn't know what else to do. I had called maintenance twice. I had no solid proof to show them. I couldn't record anything. Every time I tried to record with my phone, the whispers didn't come through clearly. All I got was a low static and maybe a muffled hiss. At work, I felt distracted. I kept thinking about the nights and how I dreaded going home. I even considered sleeping in a hotel, but that seemed expensive and inconvenient. I talked to the condo management again. They said they'd keep my complaint on file, but they had no further suggestions. When I pressed, they said no one else in the building had reported anything like this. That night, I came home and cooked dinner. I tried to keep my mind off everything. Around 11, I paced the living room, feeling that tension build inside me. Midnight approached. I stared at the vent, waiting. I hated feeling helpless. I hated waiting. The hum started like before. My heart pounded faster. I switched off the AC again, hoping for silence. It didn't help. The scraping returned, sliding through the ducts. I pressed my ear against the wall, hearing it shift from the living room to the hallway. Then it moved toward the bedroom. My throat felt tight. My breathing got shallow. I whispered to myself that I would find a solution. I refused to let this thing take control of my life. I marched into the hallway and turned the lights on. I followed the noise to the bedroom. The vent was near the ceiling. I stood there staring up at it. A gust of cool air brushed my face. It was off, so there shouldn't have been air flowing, but I felt it. Then I heard my name clear as day. Alex. I felt my knees weaken, my stomach flipped. I clenched my fists. I grabbed a chair, dragged it under the vent, and climbed up, shining my phone's flashlight inside. I saw metal walls, a few cables, and darkness. The whisper came again, right next to my ear, but I couldn't see anything. My hand shook so badly the light bounced around. That was when I felt a breeze against my face, warm this time, as though something inside the duct exhaled. I lost my nerve. I jumped down, nearly twisted my ankle, and ran out to the living room. I spent that night half awake on the couch, checking the vents every few minutes. The whispering continued off and on until sunrise. After that, I decided I had to push the condo management again. I wrote a formal complaint detailing everything. I sent emails with dates and times. I called them repeatedly until they agreed to have an overnight inspection crew come in a few days. In the meantime, I tried to cope. I stayed in the condo, but I barely slept. During the day, the place felt normal. No strange sounds, no weird feelings. But at night, it became a nightmare. As I write this down now, I'm still waiting for that overnight inspection. It's scheduled for the weekend so they can test everything in real conditions. I keep hoping there's a logical explanation, some odd mechanical glitch, a vent that echoes from another unit. But deep inside, I don't think that's the case. Every time I hear that rasping voice say my name, I feel my stomach churn and my chest tighten. It feels deliberate. It feels like something's calling out to me, moving through the ducts, room to room, following me wherever I go. I'm not sure how this will end. For now, I'm keeping every light on at night, and I'm trying to stay alert. But it's draining. Every time I hear that whisper, my heart tries to jump out of my chest. I feel sweat bead on my forehead. My legs tense up, ready to run. I can't focus on anything else. I just wait for it to stop, or for the sun to rise, whichever comes first. I hope the inspection crew finds a real, tangible cause, some faulty equipment or a hidden gap letting in outside noises. But if they don't, I might have to move again. I can't live with something calling my name through the walls. It's too much. Until they figure it out, I'm stuck here, listening to that voice echo from vent to vent, creeping closer and closer each night. I stopped in the yard when I saw my own keys hanging from the back door lock. The night air felt heavier than usual. I was tired from work, and it was after 10. I couldn't wrap my head around those keys. They were definitely mine. The little scratch on the key's head and the faded rubber ring made it clear. I stared at them for a moment, then looked around the yard to see if anyone was hiding. There was no movement or sound, just the distant hum of a neighbor's air conditioner. My pulse picked up speed. I swallowed hard and checked the rest of the area. Nothing else stood out. No footprints on the dirt patch near the fence, no dragged items or broken branches, just those keys, dangling in the lock. I tried to remember if I'd come through the back that morning. I usually lock the front door, walk to my car, and drive away. That's my routine. But the back door was shut, and there were no signs of forced entry. The handle didn't look tampered with, and the frame was intact. I stepped closer and grabbed the keys. I felt the metal between my fingers. My mind raced with questions. Did I absent-mindedly unlock this door earlier? Why would I even do that? I shook my head. I only used the front door. I was sure of that. My mouth felt dry. I rubbed my palm against my thigh. I walked around the house to the front door. It was locked. I pulled out my phone and checked the time. 10:13 p.m. I was a bit jumpy. I thought about calling someone, maybe a friend, to come over, but I didn't want to bother anyone this late. I slid the phone back into my pocket and tried to breathe normally. Then I went back to the rear entrance. The keys still felt warm in my hand from my own grip. I looked at the lock. It didn't have any scratches or chips around it. I turned the key and it opened smoothly. I stepped inside the dark kitchen. My body went on high alert. I turned on the kitchen light, half expecting to see someone crouched by the fridge or behind the counter. Nobody. The house felt quiet, almost too quiet. I listened for any creaking floors. Nothing. I placed my keys on the kitchen table, along with my wallet. The tension in my chest wouldn't let up. I could feel my heart thumping in my ears. I clenched my jaw. I took a deep breath and decided to walk through each room before settling down. I left the kitchen and turned on the hallway light. My reflection in the hallway mirror startled me. My eyes looked tired, my hair messy, my shirt wrinkled from a long day. I checked the living room. The couch was in its usual place. The TV was off. The coffee table had a few magazines. Nothing looked disturbed. I moved on to the bedroom. It was dark. I flipped the light switch. The bed was unmade, but I'd left it like that in the morning. My closet door was still closed. I opened it and ran my hand over my shirts, making sure nothing was missing. Everything seemed fine. I checked under the bed. Just some old shoes and a box of random stuff. I walked back through the hall. The door to the small laundry area was shut. I opened it and flicked on the light. My washer and dryer looked the same as always. A basket of clothes sat on top of the dryer. No one was there. I turned off the light and closed the door. I realized I was still clutching my phone. My hands felt a little clammy. I wanted some water, so I went back to the kitchen. I poured a glass and drank it in a few big gulps. My stomach was tense and my neck felt stiff. I eyed my keys on the table. Why were they in the back door lock? I know I didn't do that, at least I can't remember doing it, but who else could have done it? There was no sign of an actual break-in. My mind jumped to the possibility that someone had followed me at some point, taken my keys and returned them. But that didn't make much sense. Why would anyone do that? I shivered. It wasn't cold, but my arms felt goosebumps. I realized I was exhausted. My eyes were heavy, but my nerves kept me awake. I decided to check the perimeter outside one more time. I stepped out into the backyard with my phone's flashlight. I moved the beam over the grass, the fence, the patio. I noticed a few old leaves along the concrete. Nothing else. I walked to the front yard, shining the light on the driveway and around my car. Everything looked normal. No suspicious footprints or dropped items. I felt uneasy, standing out there in the dark. A car passed by on the street. Its headlights swept across my lawn and then disappeared. I locked the front door behind me and went back into the kitchen to retrieve my keys. I placed them in my bedroom nightstand drawer, then double-checked the windows before getting ready for bed. I didn't sleep much that night. I kept hearing small noises, a drip from the faucet or the wind brushing against the side of the house. My mind couldn't settle. Every time I closed my eyes, I pictured someone creeping in my backyard, fiddling with the back door lock. I sat up in bed and rubbed my temples. The alarm clock read 3:27 a.m. I considered getting up to watch TV, but I forced myself to lie back down and wait for the morning. When daylight came, I got dressed and decided not to linger. I didn't feel safe leaving the house without some kind of action. I called a locksmith around 8 a.m. and explained the situation. The guy on the phone sounded half asleep, but he said he could come by in an hour. I made some coffee, opened my laptop in the living room, and tried to distract myself with some emails. Nothing could tear my mind away from the question: who had my keys? The locksmith arrived around 9. He was a tall guy with a shaved head and a heavy-looking toolbox. I showed him the back door. He inspected the lock, nodded, and told me he could replace it right away. While he worked, I watched the yard. I stood by the door with my arms crossed. He asked me if I had lost my keys or if someone might have borrowed them. I shook my head and said I didn't think so. He replaced the lock, tested the key a couple of times, then handed me 2 new keys. He suggested I replace the front door lock too, just in case. I agreed. I felt a bit calmer as I watched him do his job. By the time he was done, I had 4 new keys in total, 2 for the back door, 2 for the front. I thanked him, paid him, and closed the door behind him. I spent the rest of that morning wiping down the kitchen counters, vacuuming the hallway, and organizing the living room shelves. I needed to keep busy. Every few minutes, I glanced at the windows. My phone buzzed with work emails, but I didn't answer them right away. I felt on edge. My neck was still stiff. Around noon, I realized I hadn't eaten since the night before. My stomach was tight, but I made a sandwich and ate it at the kitchen table. The new keys rested next to me. I studied them like they were suspicious objects. I didn't want to put them in my regular keychain yet. I'd thrown the old set in a drawer, away from sight. In the afternoon, I sat on the couch and tried to piece things together. Had I noticed anyone strange around the office parking lot? Did I recall any coworker making a weird comment about my schedule or my house? I went through my entire workday in my head. I remembered leaving at around 8:30 p.m. I walked to my car in the garage. It was quiet, and I just drove home. I only stopped at a gas station to fill up, and I kept my keys in my jacket pocket. That's all I recalled. I didn't see any suspicious activity. I watched some TV to relax. The hours passed, and the sun went down. I stepped outside to watch the sunset from my front porch. The air was cool. I listened to the evening sounds, some traffic in the distance, a dog barking, a plane overhead. I locked the front door with my brand new key and felt a slight relief. I hoped that changing the locks would end my worry. That night I tried to sleep earlier. I kept the new keys in the nightstand again. I kept my phone next to me. I locked every window and door. I listened for noises. It was quiet. I lay in bed and forced my eyes shut. But my mind kept drifting to the back door. I pictured those keys hanging there, the metal glinting under the porch light. Who would do that? My thoughts ran in circles. I felt my heart rate climb again. I switched on the lamp and stared at the ceiling. I sat up and breathed slowly, hoping I'd calm down. After a while, I must have drifted off because the next thing I remember is the alarm ringing at 6:30 a.m. I got ready for work, grabbed my new keys, and headed out the front door. I paused for a moment on the porch. I gazed around the yard, checking the gate, the bushes, and the fence line. Everything looked normal. I noticed my neighbor's car pulling out of their driveway. I lifted my hand in a small wave. They drove off without noticing me. I locked the door and walked to my car. All day at the office, I had trouble focusing. My coworkers asked if I was feeling all right. I just mumbled that I was tired. My eyes kept flicking to my coat pocket where I kept the new keys. I worried about losing them. During lunch, I sat alone in the break room. I thought about calling a friend to tell them the story, but I felt silly. Part of me wondered if I was overreacting, but the other part of me remembered how it felt to see my keys in that lock. I couldn't deny that shock. I got home earlier that evening, around 6:30 p.m. The house looked the same from the outside. I parked in the driveway, took a deep breath, and walked to the door. I used the new key and stepped inside. I flicked on the light. Everything was where I left it. I went straight to the back door. It was locked. I opened it, looked at the yard, and closed it again. Then I hung the new keys on a small hook in the kitchen next to the fridge. I wanted to make sure I had a clear routine. Every night I'd do the same thing. For the next few days, nothing unusual happened. I tried to live normally. I woke up, went to work, came home, and locked up. Still, every time I inserted the new key into the door, I felt tension in my stomach. I scanned the backyard each night, looking for footprints or random items that didn't belong. I didn't see anything. My nights were still restless, though. I woke up once or twice, convinced I'd heard a noise. I'd creep through the house with my phone's flashlight, checking corners and closets, nothing. A week later, I finally started sleeping better. I told myself that maybe I'd had a lapse in memory that day. Maybe I'd gone to the back door in a rush. But in my gut, I knew that wasn't right. I only used the front door. And I'd had the keys in my pocket at work. That part felt absolute in my mind. I never found out who had those keys or how they got them. I never discovered why someone would hang them on my back door lock and leave without taking anything or leaving any other trace. I didn't tell many people about it, and I never involved the police. There was no forced entry and nothing was stolen. I just made sure to stay alert. I replaced my locks, kept my new keys safe, and tried to move on. But sometimes late at night I still feel that same unease creep into my chest. I think about someone out there who somehow managed to borrow my keys, use them, and return them. I wonder if they still watch my house. I wonder if they ever plan to come back. I keep all my doors locked and my eyes open. The doubt is still there, deep down, and I don't know if it will ever go away. I never expected to feel uneasy in my own home. I bought this place a few years ago, tore out half the walls and rebuilt everything from the ground up. I picked every fixture and fought with every contractor. By the end, I felt proud. It was supposed to be my personal fortress, just 4 walls, a roof, and a new garage that I could control with a button press. But then I started hearing that awful noise in the middle of the night. I remember the first time it happened. I had been living in the renovated house for a couple of months. Work was wearing me out, so I went to bed around 11. I woke up suddenly to the sound of metal scraping against metal. I checked my phone, and it was almost 3 in the morning. I thought maybe I was dreaming. I rolled over, tried to convince myself it was nothing, and went back to sleep. The next night, the same thing. A slow, grating sound around 3. I got up and walked through the hallway in the dark. My heart was pounding because something about that noise set me on edge. It came from the garage. I held my breath, opened the interior door, and flipped the light switch. The garage was empty, the door was shut, and nothing seemed wrong. I felt a wave of relief. Maybe the motor had clicked. I closed the door and went back to bed. A few nights later, I was watching TV. I didn't notice the time until my phone buzzed with some spam text. It was 2:57 a.m. I had dozed off on the couch, half awake and half asleep. I heard the same grinding noise. It sounded like the door was straining, like it wanted to move but couldn't. I hurried to the garage, expecting to catch the door in mid-motion. By the time I got there, it was still closed. I grabbed my flashlight from a shelf near the door and did a quick inspection. I checked the rails, the motor, the wiring. Everything looked normal. I tried opening the door with the remote and closing it again. No weird behavior. I shrugged it off and went back to bed, feeling unsettled but too tired to worry about it. I decided to take some action. I contacted the company that installed the motor and control system. They came out a few days later, replaced the motor, and gave me a new remote. We tested everything. The technician stayed in the garage for almost an hour, opening and closing the door repeatedly. No issues. I felt better. I even slept soundly for a week after that. Then, on a random night, the noise returned. It was around 3 in the morning again. This time I shot out of bed immediately. My pulse was racing and my hands felt sweaty. I rushed to the garage and the door was half open. I hadn't pressed a thing. The remote was on my bedside table. The motor wasn't making any sound. It looked like the door was holding itself in place. I frowned, walked up to the motor and realized it was off. There was no humming. I jiggled the wires, checked the power, and everything was intact. I closed the door using the wall switch, but it responded only after I hit the switch a couple of times. When it finally obeyed, it moved normally as if nothing was wrong. I felt a chill run through my body because I couldn't explain what I had just seen. Over the next few days, I tried different approaches. I unplugged the motor at night. I removed the backup battery. I even switched out the remote batteries just to be sure. Still, at around 3, I'd wake up and find the door open a few inches. It wasn't wide open, but just enough to let a draft slip in. I started to dread going to sleep because I knew I might hear that squeal of metal again. My stomach would twist in knots when the clock reached midnight, and I'd struggle to keep my eyes shut. I told a coworker about it. He said maybe someone was messing with me using a universal remote or some hacking device. That made sense logically, so I installed a new security camera facing the driveway. I also changed the code on the garage opener. I even checked the neighborhood forum to see if anyone else was experiencing something similar. Nobody had any stories like mine. For a while, nothing happened. Then, one night, I got home late after some drinks with a friend. I parked in the driveway, got out of the car, and noticed it was already past 2. I felt anxious. My breathing was shallow, and I had this tightness in my chest. I opened the garage door with the remote, drove inside, and closed it. I sat there in the dark, engine off, just thinking about how this door kept opening by itself. I looked at the clock on the dashboard. It was 2:48 a.m. I decided to stay in the car and see if something happened. I turned off all the lights, kept my hand on the door handle, and waited. Time passed slowly. My heart thumped. I felt a dull ache in my shoulders because I was so tense. I kept looking at the clock, which seemed to move at half speed. I heard the hum of the refrigerator through the wall, faint clicks from the car's cooling engine, and my own breathing. Then, at around 3, the door started to move. It began with a click, and then I heard the same scraping noise. It was slow, like someone was lifting it with their hands from the outside. I felt a jolt of fear surge through me. My skin prickled, and my fingers went numb for a second. I yanked the door handle and jumped out, expecting to see someone near the motor or messing with some wires. But there was no one. The motor was silent. The lights on the opener weren't on. The door was rising by itself, a little at a time, making that grinding sound. I grabbed the door's edge and tried to force it down. It resisted for a moment, then stopped moving altogether. When I let go, it stayed in place, halfway open. I crouched down, glanced around, and looked at the control panel on the wall. Everything was normal. I tried turning the motor on. It made a little click, but the door didn't budge. I flipped the switch again, and the door began to close like normal. I stood there, breathing hard, my heart thudding in my ears. I couldn't wrap my head around what was going on. I felt a wave of nausea, like I was going to be sick. My legs were shaky and my mouth felt dry. I went back to my car, locked the doors, and sat there for a few minutes. I felt safer in the closed space. The reality of it sank in. I wasn't pressing anything. There wasn't anybody in the garage with me. The motor was off when the door moved. I tried to calm down, but my mind kept looping through the scene. I decided to call it a night, so I walked into the house, locked the garage entry behind me, and collapsed onto my couch. I slept with all the lights on that night. From that point forward, I started avoiding coming home around 3. If I finished work late, I'd hang out at an all-night diner or drive around until after 4 in the morning. I didn't like being in the house during those hours. It felt like I was waiting for something to happen. Sometimes I'd wake up at 2 or so and feel my chest tighten because I knew what time was coming. My mouth would go dry and I'd stare at the ceiling, counting the minutes. Sometimes I heard the noise, sometimes I didn't. But I always felt that tension. I decided to test the motor in the daytime again. I pressed the remote multiple times, opened and closed the door, watched the rails, and examined the wiring. The door worked perfectly. I got up on a ladder and checked every inch of the track. Nothing was bent or loose. I inspected the motor casing, took off the cover, and looked at the circuit board. Everything seemed intact. No burnt smells, no loose wires. It all looked brand new. Despite all the checks, the problem kept happening. Friends started suggesting I move out or rent another place, but I had put so much work into this house. Plus, I didn't have the money to just pick up and leave. I felt stuck. The door opening on its own became a regular occurrence, but only around 3 in the morning. Sometimes it would open just a few inches. Other times it would open halfway. A couple of times it opened all the way, which made me panic. I once ran outside in my pajamas, convinced I'd find someone messing around in my garage. But there was nobody there. The camera footage showed the door going up, but no suspicious figures or signals. The motion sensors on the camera didn't trigger anything besides the door itself lifting. My nights turned into this tense waiting game. If I heard any creak, I'd feel my hands gripping the sheets. My forehead would start to sweat. I'd try to shut out the sound by burying my head under a pillow, but that always made me feel worse. I'd end up creeping down the hallway, flipping on every light switch, and opening the door to the garage with my heart hammering. Some nights the door wouldn't open at all and I'd finally drift off to sleep around 4 or 5. But a lot of times I'd hear the screech of metal. I thought about ripping out the motor entirely, but I spent good money on it, and that didn't feel like it would solve whatever was happening. I went as far as removing the entire automatic mechanism one weekend, just to see if the door would move on its own without it. I took down the chain, unplugged the motor, and unhooked everything. The door was now manual. The only way to open it was to physically lift it. For a few nights, nothing happened. I breathed easier, thinking I had finally beat the problem. Then, one night, I heard that same scraping. I ran out to the garage, flipped on the light, and saw the door shifting upward in slow increments. There was no motor attached. I had to brace it with both hands and force it closed. The feeling of raw fear washed over me. My scalp tingled, and I felt a wave of goosebumps sweep over my arms. I slammed the door shut and locked it with the manual latch. I stood there panting, staring at the locked latch. It was secure, but the door still felt like it was straining. After a second, it went still. I spent the rest of that night in my car, parked on the street. Now I avoid coming home around 3. If I'm driving back late, I'll stop at a gas station or a 24-hour grocery store. I hate being in the house during that time. I don't like hearing the door move. I don't like confronting it. Part of me wants to know why it's happening, but I also can't stand being in the middle of it. I've tested for electrical interference. I've called different specialists to check the door. Everyone says there's nothing wrong. They look at me like I'm overthinking it, but they weren't there at 3 in the morning when the door rose by itself without a motor attached. I still live here, but I've changed my habits. I spend more time at work and less time at home. I leave all the lights on in the house. I close every curtain. I keep the garage door latched by hand. Sometimes I even place a heavy bench against it. I don't hear it move as often anymore, but I can't say it's stopped entirely. Every once in a while, especially if I'm there around 3, I'll hear that faint sound, like metal dragging along the track. Each time my mouth goes dry and my heart pounds like it's going to burst. I flick on every light, open the door, and find the latch still locked. Nothing looks out of place. But I can't shake the feeling that if I stood there long enough, I'd see it start to move again. I wish I had a neat explanation. Maybe it's a mechanical quirk or some fluke in the structure I built. But no one has found a clear cause, and I'm done trying to figure it out. I know what I've seen, and I know how it makes me feel. The simplest solution has been to avoid the house at 3 in the morning. That's my life now. I don't like admitting it to people because it sounds ridiculous and makes me look paranoid, but it's real to me. I've seen that door open on its own, motor or no motor. I don't care if nobody believes me, so that's my story. My house is bright and fresh during the day, calm and ordinary in the early evening, and then it turns into something else when the clock hits the early morning hours. I still live here because it's my home, and I poured my time and money into it. But I learned to adapt. I learned to avoid that moment when the door might lift. If I come home too late, I sit in a diner, buy a coffee, and wait until it's safe to go back. I won't claim I'm okay with it, but I haven't found a better answer yet. I just know that I can't stand to witness that door rising on its own again. The memory of that scraping sound and the sight of it moving silently in the dark still sends chills through my entire body. So I stay away, and that's how I handle it. And I always run at night. I like the streets when they're empty and quiet. Most people stay inside after midnight, so it feels like I have the world to myself. One night about 6 months ago, I started noticing a weird sound near an old municipal playground. It had been shut down for years. The gates were locked with a rusty chain and the swings were left there to rot. Every time I got close to that spot, I heard a steady squeaking sound, like a swing in motion. It made no sense because nobody was allowed in there. I remember the first time I really paid attention to it. I was jogging along the sidewalk, breathing hard, trying to keep my pace. My legs were tired from the day's work, but I pushed through because running helps me clear my head. As I approached the corner by the playground, I heard that squeak. It was slow, rhythmic, and it echoed in the night. I felt a chill on the back of my neck. My body tensed, and I glanced over at the chain link fence surrounding the place. The park was dimly lit by a single street lamp about 30 feet away. It wasn't enough light to see inside very well, but I could make out the silhouettes of the old swings. I stopped running because I thought maybe there was someone inside, maybe a trespasser or some local hanging out, but I didn't see anyone at first. I just heard that slow metallic squeak. The fence was about shoulder height, so I tried to get on my toes and look in. My breathing was loud in my ears. My heart pounded. The squeaking didn't stop. It kept going, like something was rocking back and forth. I couldn't see what was causing it. I felt uneasy, so I decided to move on. I finished my run that night, but I couldn't stop thinking about that sound. It stayed with me even when I got home. My apartment felt colder than usual. I took a quick shower, drank some water, and tried to sleep. But every time I closed my eyes, I imagined that chain link fence and those old swings. I wondered if I had really heard something or if my mind was playing tricks on me. The following nights, I stayed on the same route. I think I was curious, even though I was nervous. As the nights passed, I kept hearing that squeak. Sometimes it was faint, other times it seemed louder, like the swing was moving faster. I could sense my adrenaline spike every time I neared the park. My fingertips tingled and my stomach felt tight. I told myself it was just some random wind pattern or maybe the rusted chains responding to a breeze. But I knew there was something else going on. About 2 weeks later, I decided to get a closer look. It was almost midnight and the streets were empty. A stray cat ran across the sidewalk ahead of me, and I remember the sound of my shoes scuffing the pavement. My lungs burned a bit because I had pushed my pace earlier in the run. When I turned the corner, that squeaking noise was there again. Slow, deliberate. It felt deliberate anyway. I walked up to the fence, gripped the metal links, and peered into the darkness. The moonlight helped a bit, and I saw one of the swings moving. It wasn't the wind. There was no gust blowing. The air was pretty still that night. But the swing was in motion, swaying back and forth. My eyes strained to see who was sitting there. I saw a shape in the seat, like a person leaning forward slightly. I couldn't see a face. I froze. My pulse pounded in my ears. My muscles tightened, and I felt a trembling in my legs. I wanted to call out, but my throat felt dry. I swallowed hard and said, "Hey." Right when I spoke, the squeaking stopped. The swing became still. I tried to see if the shape was still there, but it seemed like it vanished. 1 second it was there, the next it was gone. My heart was hammering, and I felt a bead of sweat run down my forehead. I stared at that swing for what felt like a full minute. It didn't move again. I rubbed my eyes, thinking maybe I was just exhausted or seeing shadows. My breathing was shallow, so I took a few deep breaths to calm down. Then I backed away from the fence, trying not to make noise. The streetlight flickered overhead. For a second, I imagined someone standing right behind me, but when I spun around, there was no one. I laughed a little, but it was a nervous laugh. Then I started running again, faster than usual, all the way home. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed, replaying the moment in my head. I kept seeing that shape. It looked small, but I couldn't be sure of its exact size. The idea of someone or something inside that locked playground disturbed me. I tried to brush it off as a trick of the light, but I couldn't fully believe it. The next day, I walked past the playground during daylight. It was quiet. The rusty swings hung there, perfectly still. The fence was intact. There were no signs of anyone sneaking in. Everything looked normal. I went back that night, though. I felt compelled to do it. I started my usual run around 11 and reached the playground around midnight. I slowed to a walk and listened. My ears picked up every little sound. The hum of distant traffic, a dog barking a couple of blocks away, my own footsteps on the sidewalk. Then I heard that squeaking again. My chest tightened. I stepped closer to the fence, trying to keep my breathing under control. I saw the same swing moving, and I saw that shape again. It looked like a person sitting there, but I couldn't make out any details. My palms were sweaty, and my hands shook a bit as I gripped the fence. I tried to call out again, but my voice cracked. "Is anyone there?" I managed to say. The squeaking went on for a few more seconds, and then it stopped. I squinted, hoping to catch a better glimpse, but the figure vanished again. I'm not talking about running away. It just wasn't there anymore. The swing rocked a little, then came to a halt. My stomach churned. I felt a slight nausea, like the world was off balance. I ended my run early that night. I wasn't in the mood for more exercise. I went home, locked the door, and sat in my living room with the lights on. I tried to convince myself that maybe it was a trick of the shadows, or maybe someone was sneaking in and out quickly. But the gate was locked. The fence was solid, at least 5 feet tall. I couldn't figure out how anyone could get out of there so fast without me seeing. Over the next few weeks, I became obsessed with that place. My runs turned into cautious scouting missions. I would slow down before I even reached the park. Some nights, the swing was completely still and silent. Other nights, I heard it squeaking before I even saw the fence. Sometimes I thought I saw movement in the corner of my eye, a fleeting shadow, a blur near the fence. My heart would race and sweat would form on my brow. My body felt tense the whole time. It got to a point where I almost dreaded running at all, but I couldn't stop. Something about that park pulled me in. One night I decided to bring a flashlight. I tucked it into the pocket of my shorts and headed out on my run around 11:30. When I got to the park, it was quiet. I listened for the squeaking, but it didn't come. I waited, standing across the street from the fence. I counted my breaths. I heard a car in the distance, maybe half a mile away. I heard insects buzzing around the street lamp. Then, just as I started to think it wasn't going to happen, the swing started squeaking. My skin prickled. I pulled the flashlight out, clicked it on, and aimed the beam through the fence. The swing was moving, but I didn't see anyone in it. It was just rocking back and forth. The chains groaned, the seat twisted slightly. It looked worn and cracked. My flashlight beam shook because my hand was trembling. I started stepping closer. Each step felt heavier than the last. I could hear my heartbeat in my ears. I reached the fence, aimed the light directly at the swing, and saw it sway like someone had just pushed off from it. But there was no one around. I swallowed hard. My throat felt tight. I lifted my other hand to the fence, gripping it for support. The metal links felt cold against my skin. I stared at the swing until it slowed down and stopped. The chains went quiet. My arms felt numb. I stood there for a while, waiting to see if anything else would happen. Nothing did. Finally, I turned off the flashlight, slipped it back into my pocket, and started to walk away. I got maybe 10 steps when the squeaking started again. I spun around, turned on the flashlight, and aimed it. The swing was moving again like it had never stopped. I backed away quickly, my heart pounding. I almost tripped over a crack in the sidewalk. I ran straight home. My lungs burned by the time I reached my door. Once inside, I locked the deadbolt and leaned against the wall, trying to catch my breath. My legs felt weak. My shirt was soaked with sweat. I didn't sleep well that night. I kept hearing that squeak in my head, and each time I thought about it, my chest tightened. Over the next few days, I considered calling the city or maybe the police to check it out, but I knew how that would sound. There's a locked-up playground with a haunted swing that moves by itself. Nobody would take that seriously. They'd say it was the wind or maybe the fence vibrations. I started thinking I was losing my mind. I even stopped running for a week just to clear my head. But that left me restless. Eventually, I decided to confront it again. I didn't want to live with that tension. I went back one night, around the same time, midnight. I walked up to the fence and waited. At first, nothing happened. I paced back and forth, listening to my own footsteps on the sidewalk. The street lamp overhead buzzed. I could smell the damp air. It had rained earlier, and puddles shimmered under the light. After several minutes, the swing started to squeak again. That sound made the hair on my arms stand up. I grabbed the fence and shook it, testing its strength. It held firm. The gate was padlocked. I felt a sudden urge to jump over it. I knew I shouldn't do that because it's trespassing, but I had to see what was going on. My breathing grew shallow. I put my foot on one of the fence rails and pulled myself up. My foot slipped once, but I gripped the links until my palms hurt. I managed to climb over and drop down on the other side. My knees bent to absorb the impact and the gravel crunched under my shoes. I stood inside that deserted playground, flashlight in hand. The squeaking got louder. The swing moved like someone was really pushing it. I approached slowly, my flashlight pointed straight at it. My stomach felt tight, and I was ready to bolt if something happened. When I got closer, I saw the seat tilt as though someone had just gotten off, but there was nobody there. I felt a rush of cold air pass by me. My arms broke out in goosebumps. I turned around, shining the beam in every direction, but I saw nothing unusual. Just rusted playground equipment, cracked pavement, and a few overgrown bushes in the corners. I reached out and touched the swing seat. It was damp and cold, and it was definitely moving. I didn't see any fishing line or trick mechanism. I stood there, shining the light around, trying to spot some intruder. Nothing. After a few moments, the swing slowed. My breathing was rapid and my temples pounded. I felt this intense feeling that I wasn't alone, but I couldn't see anyone. I stayed there for about 10 more minutes, circling the playground, shining my flashlight on everything I could. I saw broken benches, a couple of trash cans knocked over, and an old slide with chipped paint. It was all silent except for that squeaking swing, which would randomly start and stop. I felt like someone was watching me, but I couldn't pinpoint where that feeling came from. My body was stiff with tension. I decided I'd had enough. I walked back to the fence, climbed over, and walked home. I didn't run. My legs felt like lead, and my thoughts were jumbled. When I reached my apartment, I locked the door behind me and stood in my living room just breathing, listening to my own heartbeat. I didn't sleep much that night either. Now, I still run, but I avoid that street. If I ever have to pass by there, I do it during the day. The playground is still locked and the swings are still there. I can't explain what's happening in that place. I just know it feels wrong. I feel uneasy even thinking about it. I haven't told many people. The few times I mentioned it, I got strange looks. So I keep it to myself. It's one of those things I can't make sense of, and I don't want to push my luck anymore. I have no idea what I saw, but I know I saw something, and I'd rather not see it again. I never used to feel uncomfortable in my own house. I never thought I'd glance over my shoulder in my own basement, worried about what might be hidden in the dark. That changed a few weeks ago. Now I can't ignore what I see out of the corner of my eye down there. Every time I step into that musty space, I feel an immediate drop in my stomach, like my body's bracing for something. I'm not a superstitious guy, but I can't shake this feeling that someone's crouched behind those stacked boxes watching me. My basement is part storage area, part workshop. When I first moved in, I set up a long wooden table on one side for small projects. I keep a toolbox, a few power tools, and random pieces of scrap wood there. I also put up metal shelves along one wall, where I've been stacking old boxes, paint cans, and leftover materials from various home repairs. The lighting is dim because there's only one overhead bulb that sometimes flickers. It never bothered me before. I just thought it was an old house quirk. But now, that flicker sets me on edge. I started noticing something off about a month ago. It was late at night, maybe around 1 a.m., and I realized I needed a specific wrench for a project I was doing upstairs. I went down to the basement and turned on the single light. The bulb gave off that faint hum that old bulbs sometimes do, and the corners were mostly in shadow. I walked to the workbench, rummaging through my tools. That's when I felt a prickle on the back of my neck. I turned my head slightly and saw something that made my stomach twist. It looked like a person hunched down near the shelves in the far corner. I didn't see details. It was just a shape, low to the ground, almost like someone squatting. My heart jumped and I turned fully to face it. But all I saw were boxes stacked on each other. I stood there for a moment, my pulse pounding. I wiped my hands on my jeans and took a slow breath. I told myself the boxes must have looked like a figure because of the way they were arranged. I shook my head, grabbed the wrench, and hurried back upstairs. I didn't tell anyone about it. It was late, and I felt silly. I chalked it up to lack of sleep. Over the next few days, I avoided going down to the basement at night. I didn't even notice I was doing it at first. I just found ways to get what I needed before it got dark. But 2 weeks later, I was up late again, fixing a pipe under the kitchen sink. I needed pipe tape, which I knew was on my workbench. It was around midnight. I hesitated for a second at the top of the basement stairs. I flipped on the basement light before going down, hoping that would help. I kept my eyes on the wooden steps as I descended, trying not to think about that corner. The air felt heavy. My shoulders tensed up, and I realized I was gripping the railing a little too hard. I walked over to the bench and scanned around. Tools were scattered, and I couldn't see the roll of tape right away. I was shifting things around, eyes darting everywhere. In my peripheral vision, I saw that shape again. My breath caught in my throat and my grip tightened on a hammer I'd just picked up. It felt like something was there, watching. My arm hairs stood on end. I heard a faint shuffle. My heartbeat spiked, and I spun toward the corner with the shelves, lifting the hammer a bit. Nothing moved. I saw boxes, an old lamp, a bag of cement mix. But I couldn't ignore the sensation of eyes on me. My throat felt dry, and my chest felt tight. I inched closer to the corner, forcing myself to check it out. I moved aside a couple of boxes, but all I found was more dusty junk. My heartbeat was so loud I could hear it in my ears. I muttered to myself that I was being paranoid. Then I heard something like a short, quick breath from behind me, and I whipped around. There was no one there, but that rush of fear hit me again, and I could barely swallow. I grabbed my pipe tape from the bench, hurried up the stairs, and locked the basement door. I spent the rest of the night trying to focus on the pipe fix, but my mind kept flashing back to that corner. The memory gave me goosebumps, like I wasn't alone down there. After that, I started checking the basement during the day. I'd go down, open all the windows, and turn on a big standing lamp I have for better visibility. I reorganized some of the shelves, stacking the boxes differently. I thought if I changed the layout, I wouldn't see that shape anymore. It worked for a day or two. I felt better, like I had some control over my space. But soon enough, I caught a glimpse of it again. This time, it was afternoon, and the windows let in some weak daylight. I leaned down under the workbench to pick up a dropped screwdriver, and I had that same prickle on the back of my neck. I looked up, and there it was, a crouched silhouette in the corner. My chest seized, and I stood up so fast I banged my head on the bench. When I turned around, I only saw the new arrangement of boxes. Nothing else. My head throbbed from the impact, and my eyes started tearing up a bit. I cursed under my breath and told myself I was imagining things, but my skin crawled all the same. I've tried explaining it to a buddy of mine who's into horror movies. He just laughed and told me it was probably stress or exhaustion. I wanted to believe him, but after the next incident, I couldn't brush it off so easily. 3 nights ago, I had to finish assembling a piece of furniture for the living room. I needed a power drill and some screws. It was late, around 11:30 p.m., but I just wanted to get it done. I remember standing at the top of the basement steps, feeling this tightness in my chest. My palms were sweating. I flicked the light switch, and that small overhead bulb flickered again. I took the steps slowly, one by one, scanning the basement as I descended. Everything felt oppressive, like the air was too thick. I walked to the workbench, found my drill, and started searching for the screws. My eyes kept moving toward that corner even when I tried to focus on the drawer in front of me. Every time my glance shifted, I expected to see someone squatting there, waiting. My breathing got shaky, and I told myself to hurry. Suddenly, I heard a sound that made my entire body stiffen. It was like someone inhaling hard. The sound came from the corner. It was close. I could almost feel the breath on my neck. My heart rate spiked so fast I thought I might faint. I whipped around with the drill in my hand, acting on pure adrenaline. My voice came out in a shaky burst. I yelled, "Who's there?" My words echoed in the basement. There was no answer. I walked backward toward the stairs, keeping my eyes on that corner. It felt like my legs were made of lead, and my chest was pounding so hard I could barely think. I could still sense someone watching. My skin broke out in a cold sweat. I grabbed the railing behind me and forced myself to move up the steps without turning away from that spot. As soon as I reached the top, I slammed the door and locked it. My hands were shaking so badly that I had trouble fitting the key into the lock for a moment. Once upstairs, I put the drill and screws down on the kitchen table. I stared at my hands, noticing how clammy they were. My breathing was shallow, and I couldn't calm down right away. I stood there, heart thudding, trying to gather myself. After a minute, I forced myself to return to my project in the living room. But the whole time I felt uneasy, like the basement door behind me was more than just a door. My mind kept replaying that sharp inhale I heard, as if it were right next to my ear. My shoulders stayed tense until I finally went to bed, and even then, I couldn't sleep well. Now I do my best to avoid the basement at night. If I need something from down there after dark, I try to push it to the next morning, but I can't always do that. Like last night, I realized I needed some nails. I tried to put it off. I went to bed around 10 p.m., but I couldn't sleep because I kept remembering the undone work in the garage. I was restless, tossing in bed, feeling irritated with myself for letting this fear control me. I finally got up at midnight, telling myself I'd grab the nails real fast, no messing around. I told myself, you're just gonna walk in, grab the nails, walk out. Simple. I turned on every light in the path to the basement, the hallway, the kitchen, and the overhead in the staircase. I even turned on the flashlight on my phone and held it tight in my free hand. I opened the basement door, took a deep breath, and stepped onto the first stair. I felt that same tension in my shoulders. The basement light was still flickering, but I tried to ignore it. One step at a time, I got to the bottom. I immediately aimed my phone's flashlight around, sweeping the corners. Nothing unusual, just the boxes, shelves, and tools. I moved quickly to the shelf where I keep extra nails. My footsteps sounded loud on the concrete floor. I searched for the box of nails while keeping my phone's beam pointed toward that corner. My heart pounded in my ears. The air smelled stale and damp. My breath felt too warm in my chest. My hands shook a bit as I sifted through a few small boxes. I pulled out the nails I needed, slid them into my pocket, and turned to leave. That's when I heard a different noise. It wasn't a breath this time. It sounded like a soft scrape against the floor, like a shoe sliding for just a second. My scalp tingled, and the hair on my arms stood up. The noise came from directly behind the stacked boxes in that corner. I aimed my flashlight. At first I saw nothing but the edges of the boxes and a paint can. Then, for a fraction of a second, I swore I saw movement, like something shifting its position. My mouth went dry. I didn't wait. I sprinted up the stairs, taking them two at a time. I didn't stop until I was in the kitchen with the door shut behind me. My chest heaved and I felt a knot in my stomach. I stood there panting, nails in my pocket, and a phone flashlight still on in my hand. I couldn't believe how rattled I was. I wanted to run outside and sit in my car, but that felt ridiculous. Instead, I walked around the kitchen, turning lights on and off, trying to calm down. I forced myself to drink some water. My throat was parched and my fingers trembled when I set the glass down on the countertop. I've started thinking about ways to handle this. I'm not calling the cops because there's no sign of an actual intruder, no forced entry, no footprints, nothing stolen. There's just that horrible feeling of being watched and the occasional sounds. But I can't ignore what I've seen. I've checked that basement a dozen times in daylight, moving every box, every old blanket, every leftover tile. I never find evidence of someone living down there. I've inspected the windows to make sure they're locked. I've checked all the corners behind the furnace and the water heater. It's always empty. Yet at night, something feels different. The shadows seem too dense, and that flickering bulb casts strange shapes on the walls. I've thought about installing better lighting, maybe overhead fluorescents or strong LED strips. That might help me feel more in control. But part of me worries I'll still see that crouched shape even in bright light. The idea of shining a bright beam right onto an actual figure makes my stomach lurch. What if there really is someone hiding, but there's nowhere for them to go without me noticing? unless they're crawling behind the shelves somehow, which seems impossible. I don't feel safe in my own basement. It's embarrassing to admit. I'm a grown man, and I'm afraid of some shape in the corner. But it's not just the sight. It's the sounds, too. That short inhale I heard was way too real. My body's reaction was instant, like my instincts recognized a threat. That's what keeps me up at night. Every noise the house makes after midnight puts me on alert. The refrigerator clicks off, and I jump. A floorboard creaks upstairs and my heart rate climbs. I feel like I'm losing my grip on what's normal. I haven't told many people about this. My buddy still thinks it's all in my head, but he hasn't stood in that basement, feeling the air change and hearing someone breathe right behind him. He hasn't fumbled for the light switch with sweat dripping down his face, convinced he's seconds away from seeing something that shouldn't be there. I have no proof to show anybody. No footprints, no recordings, no sightings beyond that silhouette. But I know something's there, or at least something feels there. The tension in my body doesn't lie. For now, I'm careful about when I go downstairs. I only go if it's absolutely necessary, and I always keep my phone's flashlight on, even in the daytime. I've considered setting up a camera, but part of me doesn't want to see what might appear on the footage. I feel trapped between wanting answers and wanting to pretend this is all in my imagination. But every time I step into that basement, that shape appears at the edge of my vision, crouched down, observing me in silence. I don't know if this will ever escalate or if it'll just keep haunting the corner of my eye. There's a chance it's a trick of the light or some weird illusion caused by the piles of boxes. The breathing might be the old furnace or my own heavy breathing echoing. I can't prove otherwise. But as things stand right now, I can't shake the dread I feel whenever I set foot on those steps. My body reacts before my mind can rationalize. My chest tightens, my jaw clenches, and I get ready to bolt. So I do my best to finish my tasks fast, get what I need, and go back upstairs. At least nothing has actually attacked me. I tell myself that every time. Whatever it is, or whatever I'm imagining, it hasn't laid a hand on me. But I can't control the alarm bells going off in my head when I hear that scraping sound or a quiet exhale behind me. I can't stop my heart from racing when I see that shape out of the corner of my eye and feel my neck hairs rising. It's constant. It's real enough to keep me from feeling safe in my own home at night. That's all there is to my story for now. I'm living with this strange presence in my basement, avoiding late-night visits, double-checking the locks and wondering if it's just a pile of boxes or something else entirely. I can't give a neat conclusion or a satisfying resolution. I can only say that I still see that crouched silhouette and I still hear those breaths in the darkness. That's why I don't like going down there after midnight, and that's why I keep a hammer close by every time I do. I'll never forget the first time I saw the clock hit 3:17 and heard that damn alarm go off. It was pitch black in my bedroom. I remember jolting awake, my eyes stinging, and my heartbeat hammering in my ears. The sensor in the hallway started its shrill beeping, and all I could think was that someone had broken in. I leaped out of bed, my feet tangled in the sheets, and practically crashed into the bedside table. My shin still hurt by the time I made it to the hallway light switch. I flicked the switch on, and my eyes struggled with the sudden brightness. The sensor's little red LED was blinking. I saw the reflection of that tiny light on the walls. I took a few deep breaths, swallowing hard, and crept down the hallway, my socks sliding a bit on the wooden floor. My throat felt dry, and I realized I wasn't sure if I could even shout if I saw someone in front of me, but I forced myself to call out anyway. "Hello? Is anyone there?" Silence. Nothing but the sound of my own breathing. I checked the front door, locked from the inside. I checked the windows in the living room, all closed, no sign of forced entry. I felt the back of my neck tingling. My entire body felt tense. My arms felt heavy, and my stomach was turning. I opened the closet, the bathroom door, even looked under the dining table. I wasn't sure what I expected to find. I ended up turning off the sensor alarm, thinking maybe it was a faulty battery. It took me a while to get back to sleep because my heart wouldn't slow down. When I finally did sleep, my dreams were full of weird shapes moving through dark hallways. But the next morning, I tried to push it away. Maybe the sensor glitched or some shadow set it off. That was the first time. But then it happened again the next night. Right at 3:17 in the morning, that same shrill alarm pierced the silence. This time, I jumped out of bed so fast I felt a small pop in my knee. I grabbed the baseball bat from beside my bed, one I usually kept there for peace of mind, and rushed into the hallway. I wasn't even fully awake, but adrenaline was pumping. My mouth was dry again, and I could feel sweat forming on my forehead. When I got to the corridor, the sensor was blinking like before, the alarm still going off, but no one was there. I walked around, checking every corner, feeling a slight chill in the air. I looked up at the ceiling. I checked around the corners of each doorway, the small space between the fridge and the wall. Nothing. I turned the alarm off, stared at that sensor, and felt a surge of frustration and confusion. Why exactly 3:17? I looked at my phone just to be sure. It was 3:17 on the dot. Over the following week, it kept happening. Every single time, 3:17 a.m. I started anticipating it. I'd wake up at 3:15, glance at the clock, and lie there waiting. Right on cue, 3:17 would roll around and the alarm would scream. I'd jump up, run out, and find nothing. No broken windows, no footsteps in the living room, no scuff marks on the walls, no open doors. I even started checking for tiny holes or loose wires that might trip the sensor. Didn't see anything odd. I decided to change the sensor. I bought a new model with a higher sensitivity range. I also changed the batteries, the mounting angle, and even got a second sensor for the same hallway. I placed them both at different heights. If it was an animal, or maybe a breeze from somewhere, I wanted to catch some sign of it. But it kept happening, and it always stayed the same. 3:17 a.m., beep, 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 me flying out of bed, scanning the hallway, no sign of anything. I tried ignoring the alarm for one night just to see what would happen. I lay there in bed with my eyes open, listening to the beeping. My heart was racing and I was sweating through my shirt. After about 30 seconds of the alarm, I couldn't take it anymore. I had to go check. My instincts wouldn't let me stay put. The corridor was empty, just like every other night. The alarm wouldn't stop until I switched it off. I felt like the house was taunting me. My day-to-day life started feeling weird. I'd go to work groggy and jumpy. My boss noticed. He asked if everything was okay. I mumbled something about rough nights, but I didn't want to get into details because it sounded ridiculous. Yeah, my sensor alarm is going off at exactly 3:17 a.m. every night for no reason. People would think I was exaggerating or losing my mind, but I knew it was happening and it was messing me up. I tried moving the sensor to different parts of the corridor, thinking maybe there was a warm pipe behind a wall or some draft from outside. It made no difference. Then I installed a smart camera with a motion sensor. I linked it to my phone, hoping to get actual footage of whatever was going on. I tested it during the day, walked in front of it, triggered it, and it recorded me just fine. I felt a small rush of hope. Finally, I'll catch something in the act, I thought. That first night with the camera set up, I woke up at 3:16, stared at the clock, and waited. At 3:17, the sensor beeped. I was half expecting it, but I still jolted a bit. My heart jumped and I felt a drip of sweat roll down the side of my face. I grabbed my phone from the nightstand and opened the camera app. It showed that motion had been detected and recorded. I felt an immediate spike of adrenaline. I rushed to open the playback. The footage showed the timestamp 3:17. The hallway light was off, so it was in night vision mode. I saw the corridor, slightly grainy and gray. For a moment, the camera just showed static shapes of furniture and walls, and then the video ended. I rewound it twice, watching carefully. There was no movement on screen, no shadow, no figure, no shape. The sensor picked up motion, but the camera showed nothing moving. I felt a chill run up my arms. I had goosebumps. I couldn't explain it. After a few nights of the same pattern, sensor goes off, camera records motion, but shows an empty corridor. I started feeling paranoid. I was sleeping maybe 3 or 4 hours a night. I was becoming snappy with coworkers, and I jumped at little noises in the office. One afternoon, I went home early and stood in the corridor with the sensors. I watched the clock, tested the sensors, and walked back and forth checking for any anomalies. I considered the possibility of some electrical interference, but I didn't have any large devices in that area. The wiring in the house seemed normal. Eventually, I decided to stay up until 3:17 to see what would happen if I was already in the hallway when the time came. I brewed coffee around midnight, sat on the sofa in my living room, and put my phone next to me with the camera app open. The corridor was dark, but I could see the tiny sensor lights from where I sat. Time crawled. I kept checking my phone's clock. 1 a.m., 2 a.m., 2:45 a.m. My legs felt restless. My mind started wandering, but every time I caught myself drifting, I'd snap back to the moment. By 3:10, my heart was already thumping. The house was silent. I could hear the faint hum of the refrigerator, the occasional crack of the building settling, and my own breathing. When 3:17 hit, I leaned forward on the sofa. My shoulders were tense and I was clenching my jaw. Then the alarm went off. The sensor beeped. I jumped up so fast that I nearly tripped over the coffee table. I forced myself to walk quickly but carefully into the hallway. The alarm was blaring and the lights from the sensors were blinking. I looked around. The hallway was empty. I squinted, trying to see if any shape or outline was there. Nothing. I stood there, letting the alarm go, looking in every direction. I felt a rush of cold sweat on my back. The alarm's sound cut straight through me, and my ears felt hot. I turned it off, took a deep breath, and checked my phone camera. It had recorded again, and again it showed nothing. I started feeling a mixture of anger and fear. Part of me wanted to rip the sensors off the walls and throw them in the trash. But that wouldn't solve anything because deep down, I knew something was setting them off. Something was crossing that hallway, I just couldn't see it. I spoke to a friend who was into electronics, and he suggested maybe dust particles or even a large insect. But dust wouldn't trigger a motion sensor so consistently at the exact same time. An insect might, but it would show up on the camera's night vision, at least as a small blur, and I'd probably see it flying around or crawling somewhere else. This wasn't adding up. I decided to try a different approach. I placed talcum powder on the floor in the hallway. I sprinkled a light layer across the length of the corridor, near the baseboards, and right under the sensor. If something or someone was moving through there, maybe I'd see footprints. That night, the alarm went off as always. I walked out, checked the powder, and saw no prints. Not even a smear. The floor was still perfectly smooth with white powder. My nerves were shot. I wiped my sweaty palms on my shorts and felt that same shaky frustration. Nothing was there, but the sensor said otherwise. Night after night, I kept confronting that alarm. My routine became a desperate cycle. Fall asleep late, jolt awake at 3:17, investigate, find nothing, try to go back to sleep. Each time I felt more exhausted. I started skipping meals. My appetite was gone, replaced by a constant ball of tension in my gut. Sometimes I'd catch myself staring at the clock in the living room, waiting for time to pass, dreading the moment I'd have to face that beep again. I tried leaving all the lights on in the hallway once. I thought maybe the sensor was more sensitive in the dark. Didn't matter. It still went off at 3:17. Bright lights, dim lights, no lights. It made no difference. I replaced the batteries, swapped sensors, rearranged them, and nothing changed. The strangest part was the clock accuracy. It wasn't 3:16 or 3:18. It was never 3:15 or 3:19, always 3:17. I checked my phone's clock against a computer and against the microwave clock. They all matched. The logs from the alarm system also showed the same thing, 3:17 exactly, every single night. By this point, I was fed up. My nerves were frayed, and I felt a constant ache in my head. I thought about calling some kind of specialist, or maybe even sleeping at a friend's place to see if the situation would repeat without me there. But I didn't want to abandon my own house, and I had no explanation. It's not like I was hearing footsteps or voices. I wasn't seeing shadowy figures or flickering lights. The only tangible evidence was the motion sensor being triggered. I started talking to neighbors, asking if they had experienced anything like power surges or weird timing issues with electronics. One neighbor mentioned that sometimes around 3 a.m. he heard a loud truck passing by. But that didn't explain the perfect timing or why my indoor sensors were picking something up. Another neighbor suggested maybe it was a cat outside. But we're talking about an indoor hallway in a locked house with all windows shut. It didn't make sense. After enough nights of this, I decided to block off the hallway entirely. I closed the doors on both ends, locked them, and wedged chairs against them. There was no way for anything to cross that space without me hearing the doors open or the chairs scrape the floor. That night, I stayed on the living room side. Sure enough, 317 rolled around, and the sensor beeped again. The chairs were exactly where I left them. Neither door had been opened. I felt my stomach twist. There was simply no explanation. I kept notes on everything: dates, times, minor observations. I noticed I would sometimes feel a slight change in temperature around 3 a.m., but I was never sure if it was just me or an actual drop in the house. I installed a basic thermostat in the hallway to see if there was a pattern. Sometimes it read a normal temperature. Sometimes it was a degree or two lower, but not enough to be definitive. Still, that alarm never failed. 317. Beep, beep, beep. One night, I tried turning off all the circuit breakers to see if maybe the electricity was causing some glitch. I shut everything down except for one breaker that powered the sensor. The house was otherwise dark and silent. The alarm still triggered at 317. I stood there in the blackness, feeling sweat build under my arms, and turned off the alarm with shaky hands. Then I went to the panel and turned the breakers back on. I felt drained and unsettled. I started sleeping in the living room so I could be closer to the hallway. I'd lie there on the couch, fully dressed, with a flashlight on the coffee table. Some nights I'd turn the TV on with low volume to distract myself. The tension would build as the clock approached 317. My chest felt tight and my neck muscles were stiff. Once it hit that minute, I'd stand up waiting. The alarm would beep, I'd walk into the hallway and find nothing. After weeks of this, I couldn't keep it inside anymore. I told 2 friends and asked them to stay over one weekend. I just wanted someone else to witness it. They arrived on a Friday night, both of them carrying overnight bags. They joked about bringing ghost hunting gear, but I didn't laugh. We set up an air mattress in the living room and I explained the routine. I warned them it would happen at 317. They were skeptical but curious. We all sat there talking, playing cards, occasionally glancing at our phones for the time. I could feel my nerves spiking as it got closer to 3 in the morning. My legs were bouncing and I couldn't focus on the conversation. When 317 hit, the alarm blasted through the quiet. My friends jumped. One of them almost fell off the sofa in surprise. We all scrambled to the hallway. Once again, the sensor was going off, the lights were blinking, and no one was there. We checked everything for about 10 minutes. Nothing was out of place. Doors and windows were still locked. My friends looked uneasy. They weren't laughing anymore. The next night, the same exact thing happened right at 317. We watched the camera footage together. It showed the timestamp, the motion detection overlay, but an empty corridor. One friend rubbed his arms as if he was cold. The other kept shaking his head, whispering, "This is insane." They left on Sunday morning, and I noticed they didn't joke about it when they said goodbye. So here I am. It's been like this for too long. I'm still going through it almost every single night. If I ever sleep through it, I wake up to find the log showing 317, motion detected. It never misses. I have no clue what's causing it. I've done every check I can think of. I've replaced sensors, repositioned them, changed the batteries, installed cameras, sprinkled powder, blocked the hallway. Nothing helps. The sensor goes off. I find nothing. and I'm left with that tight feeling in my chest and a lump in my throat. I'm not sure what else to do. I just stand there in that hallway, eyes darting around, searching for an explanation. The clock says 3:17. The alarm blares, and each time I'm left with no answers, just an empty space and a nagging sense that something, somewhere, is crossing my hallway at the exact same minute every night, and I can't see it. I don't know if I ever will. All I know is the alarm never lies, and neither does the clock. 3:17, every night, and so far it hasn't stopped. I got home last month feeling tired but glad to be back. I walked into my living room and saw something that made my stomach flip. Several of the picture frames on my wall were turned upside down. One of them was flipped so far around that the back was facing outward. I keep these photos organized at the same height, perfectly aligned in a neat row. I hate when anything looks messy or out of order. I looked around trying to see if there was any sign of a break-in, but everything else seemed normal. My front door was still locked. The windows were shut. My furniture was untouched. Nothing else appeared out of place. It was the frames. It was just the frames. I grabbed one of them, a photo from a trip to California a few years back, and checked the frame for damage. It wasn't broken. The glass was intact. The hooks on the back were still tight. Whoever messed with it was careful. I felt my heart pounding. I stared at the wedding photo of my grandparents. That was the one that disturbed me the most. It was turned completely backward, exposing that plain cardboard backing. I've always kept that particular photo in a nice brass frame in the center of the display. Now it looked like some kind of message. I put it back in its normal position, trying to ignore the prickle on the back of my neck. I told myself that maybe I had bumped into the frames by accident, but I knew I hadn't. I had been out of town the entire weekend, visiting my mother in the countryside. I locked up carefully before I left. I always double-check. I can't stand leaving anything open or unsecured, especially with my job. I'm an IT manager in a small company, and I work with data security all the time. I'm used to checking details. That night, I walked through every room, turning lights on and off, looking for any sign of forced entry. The locks looked fine. There were no scratches on the windows. I felt a chill in the living room, like the air was still, but I chalked it up to my own tension. I ended up going to bed late, but I didn't sleep well. I kept thinking about those frames. The next morning, I woke up earlier than usual, feeling restless. I went back to the living room and looked at the frames again. They were still in the proper position, so at least nothing had changed overnight. I decided not to think too much about it. I had work to do. I had a few meetings and a bunch of emails waiting. My plan was to let it go. But 3 weeks later, I visited my mother again. She lives about 4 hours away. She's healthy, but sometimes she needs help with errands, and I like to be there for her. I stayed the entire weekend. When I came back on Sunday afternoon, the frames were rearranged again. Not all of them, just some. This time, the wedding photo of my grandparents was upside down, near the edge of the shelf where I keep my travel souvenirs. 2 other family photos were also flipped. They were both from my father's side of the family. Again, I saw no sign of a break-in. My front door was still locked, with no tampering around the latch. The windows were secure. It felt wrong. I felt this tightness in my chest. It was like someone was singling out those pictures on purpose. I tried to calm myself by going through the house methodically. I opened all the closets. I checked under my bed. I looked inside the crawl space. I found nothing. No footprints, no disturbed dust, no missing objects. The only change was in those frames. Once again, I turned them back to their normal positions. My palms were damp. My breathing felt shallow. I was anxious but also irritated. It felt like an invasion of my privacy. I stood there in my living room with the lights on, scanning every corner. That night, I sat in my favorite armchair with the TV on, but I couldn't focus on any show. I kept glancing at the frames. It's a habit of mine to keep things neat. I grew up that way. My father was in the military, and everything in our house was always organized and labeled. Those frames had never been out of order before. I felt sweat on my forehead even though it wasn't hot. My mind kept racing through possibilities. Could a friend have a spare key? Did someone find a way to pick the lock? I thought about calling the police, but there was no proof of a crime. Nothing was stolen or damaged besides the frames being moved around. A couple of days passed. I tried to go about my life. I worked from home sometimes, and whenever I walked into the living room, I double-checked the frames. They stayed in place for the rest of that week. I started to wonder if I had imagined the whole thing. Maybe I was forgetting to lock up properly. But I knew I was careful. I always check twice before I leave. Then, one Friday night, I decided to set up a small camera in the living room. I had an old webcam in my office drawer. I figured I could record while I was gone for the weekend. If anyone or anything came into the living room, I'd catch it on video. So I put the webcam on top of a bookshelf, angled it toward the wall with the photos, and ran the cable to my laptop. I tested it for a while. The picture was decent, not the best quality, but it should have been enough to see if someone came inside. That weekend, I went to see my mother again. She was fine, just needed me to help install a new washing machine. We spent Saturday afternoon working on it. I tried not to think about my living room or those frames. On Sunday morning, I drove back. As soon as I entered my house, I felt a rush of nervous energy. The living room looked normal at first glance. But when I walked closer to the wall, I saw that same wedding photo turned upside down again. It was the only one out of place this time. The rest were aligned as I had left them. My shoulders felt tense and I hurried toward my office to check the webcam footage. I sat down at my desk and opened the video file.